Okay, I guess we can start. So, good morning all. It's super nice to see you so numerous in this very last hour of this Web Application 1 course. So, thank you to stay with me until the very end of this journey. As you should know, today we are going to have something like an exam simulation. I would say something like, because it's almost impossible to solve an entire exam in just 2 hours and a half, something like that. So what we are going to do basically is to, I would say, discuss together about how we can have an exam like this. So I would like to listen to you, what you should do, what you have in mind to do if you had to solve this exam. And obviously I would guide you a bit. So I would say if something is definitely 100% wrong, but except for that, I would like to remind you that there is no one only solution for this kind of exam, because you have to develop a web application so you can take your own development decision. The important point is that during the oral examination you have to be aware of the decision that you've taken for the exam. So, does everybody of you already read this text? Do you know that together we are going to solve this exam? Anybody already read the text? Okay, just a couple of you. Very good. Okay, so I would say that I could give you, I don't know, something like 5-7 minutes to read the text, and then we start discussing together, okay? I would stop the recording if I found the pause button, that is this one. Okay, I hope that the recording is start again. So, I hope that you had the time to read the text. So, from your point of view, I don't know, let's talk about the main requirements. Talk about functional and non-functional requirements. First of all, does everybody of you know the difference among a functional and a non-functional requirements? Okay, someone could try to explain that? Okay.
For functional requirements, we need more that the functions that the user can use on the website for the application. Like for example, in this case, you see the courses, each1 and whatever. The non-functional requirements is more related to the functionality of the application itself, like for example the response time, how many times we can log in, log out without failure.
Okay, so I just repeated for all of you for the recording. So a functional requirement is something strictly related to the application, so what the user can do with your application, so creating a study plan or moving some exam in the study plan, which is something that is explicitly asked by the application. Non-functional requirements instead are something related to the design of the application, as your colleagues say. So, for instance, how much the application is responsive, or which is something that we did not evaluate in the course, but something, for instance, about the coherence of the APIs, so if you define the APIs properly, if you properly define the database, or stuff like that. Those are non-functional requirements. So, from your point of view, what are some functional and non-functional requirements of this application? Any ideas? Not very good. Just a couple of them. I would like to see if anyone would like to answer before, otherwise it's what? Creating a study plan, for instance, is a requirement, okay? Any other? What? Add courses to the study plan, right? What do you mean with update?
Change if you are have already a CLAN, add a person CLAN or remove.
Okay, so adding or removing person to the study plan, and I guess make these changes persistent, right? Any other functional requirements that we have here? Okay. Okay, if you read carefully the text, the stuff about choosing the study plan must be managed properly, because for instance you cannot switch from full-time to part-time, but you have to, okay, not nice, but you have to delete, if you already have a study plan, you have to delete it and recreate it. But yeah, that's a concept, we for sure need some APIs for that. And what about something which is non-functional? Okay, you write the responsiveness, but it is not something that we are going to evaluate, so we are not seeing it. I mean, if you mean a responsive layout, we would not ask you to create an application that is responsive. You can just design it for a desktop environment. But obviously, if you have to develop something like that for a customer, probably he or she would expect that your application is responsive. Okay, then what do you say? Okay, what do you mean with safety?
Like encrypting passwords, encrypting stuff that you encapsulating the calls, etc.
Okay, so for instance, hashing passwords, you are not encrypting the password, but you are creating an hash. Anybody of you knows the difference between enciphering something and hashing something? I hope that now is clear, but you want to try to explain that?
Hashing is a one-way function where encrypting implies the
Yeah, okay, so when you encrypt something, you can decrypt it, so it's a reversible function, while the hash is not. So you create an hash, and you do that for the password for security reasons, because you don't want that if a malicious user stole your database, have access to all the passwords of your users. Okay, so this is a non-functional requirement. And another non-functional requirement is, for instance, checking if you can have access to a root when you are logged in or not. This is very important. This is something that you definitely have to manage. I would also say something about, maybe it's better when we have written something to discuss this stuff. Okay, so I would say that, for instance, we can, is here, no, is here. Okay, so I prepared something similar to what Professor De Russis does usually. So it is exercise 16, exam simulation, with a set of stuff that I would like to discuss with you. So we are going, as I said before, to understand the approach. I would like to remind you to read carefully, really carefully, the exam text, because remember to be extremely compliant with the exam requirements. This is something extremely important. If you have some doubts about the requirements of the text, try to read it several times, because very often you have the answer to your doubt already in the exam requirements. Remember that even during your professional life, if you have a document that specifies which are the requirements from your customers, you have to be more strict as possible with such requirements. And my personal suggestion is, do not try to implement something which is outside those requirements. So do not implement more than what is required. It's not really useful, even because at exam time, if you develop something which is not required and you do it well, okay, but if you do it wrong, you can also lose point for something which is not required. So don't do it, trust me. And obviously, you have to know what you are using inside the text, inside your assignment. I strongly suggest you to try to be more compliant as possible with what we explained you during the course, because obviously you can use whatever function, whatever library you want, but probably if you use something that is outside the scope of the course, we are going to ask you more about this component because we want to be sure that it's something that you really understand how to use. So my suggestion is try to be as more compatible as possible to what we explain you. And really, you must know what is inside your code. So I don't know, I have, for instance, this, where is this one? This example application that probably if we have time we can have a look to that. And I don't know, if in the beginning of your application you include some stuff, for instance, you include in Express because you need it for your API, or you are using Morgan because you want a login middleware, I expect that you know why this function are here, okay? Because I remember last year I asked to a student, could you explain me the purpose of this middleware? And he said to me, I have no idea of what is this. And I mean, I was thinking that was an easy question, but indeed it's not. So if you require, or I don't know, if I ask you what is the purpose of passport, do you know what is the purpose of passport? Why it is here in the code? Why? Yeah, so it's a middleware. Use it for authentication. You have to know it to know why there is this instruction there. Or do you know what is the local strategy? Yeah, it's a strategy used for authenticate, and specifically is username and password. Okay, so you have to know why there are some instruction in your code. It's not really acceptable that you say me, okay, I have no idea. Not very good, okay? Let's go back. So, I would say that we can start trying to design, for instance, the database. So I would take the README file and I would try to fill it with you, which is something similar of what you have to do for your exam. So I would write exam0, exam simulation study plan. Something very easy, last name, first name, you should know them. And I would start from database tables. Okay, so any one of you would like to say which kind of table do you think that we need for this application? Can you repeat it louder? A table for the courses? Makes sense, I would say. So let's write here. Anybody, if you can read the text, or do you need that I increase it a bit more? Okay. Is it better? Okay. So let's define, for instance, a table courses. And what fields from your point of view? I heard something like name, but okay. Okay, the ID, yeah, or the course ID as you prefer. Then the course name, or just name to be simple. We can also write just simply ID, considering that we are inside the courses table. Okay, which other fields? Those are explicitly written in the text, so it should be easy. The required fields for? Okay, the pre-requirements basically. Okay, could make sense. Requirements. Then number of credits. I would write it here. If we have the pre-requirements, we for sure need also incompatibility. Okay, do we have put everything? Number of students enrolled, right? I would say just enrolled. And Let's write something like max students, like just to have an idea. Okay? Do we miss something? I would say no. Do you think that we are missing something?
Another question for me, do you think it's better to have an integer of the number of students per row, or is it better to have the IDs of the students and we take the length of the array that is stored?
Okay, so basically the question is, do you think that it's better to have a fixed, I would say, an integer in the database that say me how many students are enrolled, or automatically compute this number through an SQL query, basically, something like that. Okay. I mean, as usual, I think that it's a matter of trade-off, because if you have this number, if, for instance, if we here write something like, which already were written, so enrolled students, for instance, you have to update the table every time you modify a study plan. So every time that a study plan is modified, you have to write back this value inside the database. And probably you lose a bit of time, because every time you have to write this table, managing the concurrency and stuff like that, we would now go deeper in concurrency for database in this course, but if you have a database management system course or something like that, you should know about that. And this is an issue. On the other side, if you compute the number of enrolled students, every time that our students want to put this exam in his or her study plan, you have to compute this value and check if he or she can do it. So I would say that it depends if you plan to have many writing interaction or if you plan to have many reading interaction, I would say. So do you think that in your application, will you have more times in which you write a study plan or more times in which a user interact with your study plan? So I would say that both solutions are acceptable, both have pros and cons. So, I mean, at least, I'm not a database expert, but this is just my opinion. You have a question? No? Okay. Okay, I would say that we put almost everything in the table. Any other tables that we need? I would say that you already have an ins. Could have sense, but I would like to start from a table that is basically already written. Users, okay? So what kind of field do you think that you need for users? Don't be shy. So you say email, which could be a primary key. Or do you think to have an ID, for instance? Okay, makes sense. Even because we suppose that the emails are unique, so email could be a primary key. Okay, so one of your colleagues is saying why we don't put a unique ID and then the email for the authentication. That could be another valid solution. It's up to you. I would say that, again, I'm not a database expert, but there is some people that say that an ID is basically mandatory. Indeed, many database management systems, even if you do not put an ID on your table, they put it behind that you know that there is it. So could have sense. From my point of view, considering that we would like to have unique users, so email have to be unique. You can save a bit of space and don't store the IDs, but it's not wrong to have it. So if you want to put it in your application, it's perfectly fine. Okay, after email, what are you saying? Name of the user may have sense. Hashed password. I would like to write it in this way. Hashed password. The salt, yeah, and What?
The role.
The role? What do you mean with role?
Role inside the application.
Ah, okay. In this specific application, we do not have admin user or stuff like that. So I would say that we could not put it inside it. But in other kind of application has perfectly sense. I guess that you are thinking, for instance, to the first call, the CMS application in which you have a role. Makes sense. And well, the study plan ID, it depends. I would say that I would prefer to have the user ID in a study plan table, probably. But you can also, for instance, you can put the kind of study plan. Consider that in this application you can have only full-time or part-time study plan. For instance, you can put it here if you want. You can say this student has a full-time study plan or this student has a part-time study plan. Could have sense. It's perfectly reasonable. Okay, a field to say there is already a study plan or not. Yeah, it's a field that could have sense. I would also, considering I was thinking about, do you know, everybody of you know what is the purpose of salt? What? But let's start from the beginning. What is salt? A random string. Okay, makes sense. And why do you put here?
Because if you have two entries with the same password, they have different hashes.
Okay, so the main purpose is you need to have a different salt for each entry of the database. And when you compute the password of your user to create the hashed password, you add this salt to the process. So you add this random value. And obviously, considering that this value is random, almost random for each user, you need to store it in the database, because when you create the hash, you don't know what is the salt. So you need to keep this information. And I would like to stress that these values have to be different for every user. Because I saw some database with, okay, there is the salt, but it was the same for every user. And if you put the same salt for every user, it's the same of not having it. So beware of this kind of stuff. This is a non-functional requirement, for instance. Do you have other comments about the table? No, okay, because I was remember that you raise your hand. What? Okay, the Boolean field. Okay. Any other comments? Okay. So we talk about a third table. Do you remember it? Which table? Come on. Study plan. And what do you expect to have here? An ID, I would say. Then I'm not very consistent in the names. Some camel case, some not camel case, but try to be consistent when you write your tables. Email. Wait. Yeah. Considering that we did not use a user ID, yeah, make have sense to put the email. So probably I would reconsider your proposal to have an ID, to have a smallest external key in the study plan. So could have sense to put here a user ID. Also having an email as your colleague proposes, okay, but just I prefer to have ID as external keys, just a very personal preference. Any other fields? The courses ID. So do you here it is important to decide which kind of entry do we want to have. Do you imagine of having an entry for each course? So for instance, you will have a plain course ID. And so for instance, you will have something like the user one, entry one associated to the user one, and with the course, for instance, web application one. And then you have another entry, user one, ID2 and course, I don't know, software engineering and so on? Or do you expect to have a list of course IDs? Okay, so your colleague proposed a list. Anyone propose the other approach? Even you?
No, it depends, because if it is, that means that every time we modify the same line in the database, whereas when we have a different line for each core segment, you're simply dealing for one new one. So
Exactly, and this is also okay. Your colleagues just say that the pros and cons of having different stuff in the same row, and another, if you would like to call it so, issue is that if you put many ID in the same row, you are basically managing the database in a non-relational way, because the relational database approach would ask you to have just one curse per line. So it depends of how we want to implement the database. We are not so strict on this point, so we want to queue points if you manage the database in a non-relational way, but probably a database expert would say that using a SQLite database in non-relational is not the best. But I mean, so if we imagine to manage having one curse per line and we do not add additional table, we for sure need to store somewhere if the user has a full-time or part-time study plan, I would say. Do you agree with that? So probably we can put it here. I would say study plan type, something like that. And here we have again different approaches. We can, for instance, having a table in which we specify that which are the study plan type. So for instance, writing something like table, or I don't have this, I don't know, study plan type, and here put something like we have an ID and I don't know the name and the max credits, something like that. Okay, so for instance, you define the full time, which has this number of credits, and also mean credits. For instance, this table could have sense if you plan to have many kind of study plans. Okay, considering that we have only 2 study plans, part-time, full-time, and that this number of credits are fixed, probably I would say that we don't need this table and we just store this information inside the application, because we know that a part-time study plan has between 40 and 20, I don't remember the number, from 20 to 40, while the full-time has to 60 to 80. So that, again, these are 2 different approaches that could have sense. Okay, I would say, do you have any other comments about the database, or do you think that we can go further? Obviously, when you implement even your application for the exam, I expect that you take some decision, you go on, then when you implement another stuff, you say, okay, maybe it is better to have these other tables, so until the very end you can modify, but try to be as more coherent as possible. So, you want to add anything more on the database? Do we forget something? Probably, but you don't know what. Okay. Okay, I would say that it could be enough for the moment, so we discuss something more. Okay, I would say API. Server side, I would start. Okay. Which kind of API do we need from your point of view? No one, no ideas. Do you raise your hand? Okay. What? Get add courses, okay, to have a list of courses. And I would say that I always think that probably in this point it is better that you try a bit by yourself. Okay, so I would say that I could give you, I don't know, for instance, 5 minutes to define some APIs, and then we discuss them together. Okay, do you agree? Okay, so I don't know, around 9:57, 58, something like that. Okay. Okay, I think we can resume and give you more time than we expected. Okay, so do you want to propose some APIs? Do you think a bit? I saw that some of you start already to implement them. I would just ask you to create something, a template. I mean, the URL, the request body, the response body, not to implement the whole API, but I mean, what do you think? What do you want to propose as APIs? Okay, login and logout. That makes 100% sense, and for this reason, I would say that we could stole them from, for instance, this solution. These are very simple. You should also write something with the response body, with the request body and response body, but just to have an idea of them, they are very standard. So I would propose the same API that we wrote even for the solution of Lab 11 that hopefully will be released today or tomorrow. So hopefully until the end of this week you will have the solution of Lab 11, but it's also the same approach followed by Professor De Russis during the lecture. So do you all agree with this kind of API? Do you implement differently? Do you have comment about that? Is it clear? Okay.
What about between the API login and API logout?
Okay, so your colleague asked, we could write something like, for instance, API login, I guess, to execute the login, and API logout for execute the logout. I would say that it is not wrong because we are even not following some strict approach for defining the APIs. We propose you to follow this approach to be a bit compliant with the REST paradigm, which is something that is basically standard to define APIs. And because we are working with the concept of sessions, you know, so we choose to use a session between the client and the server to move the data. And so that the point that we want to stress here is that we are using a POS, that is the operation to create something, to create a session. And indeed we use the plural, you know, we use sessions because we are thinking about a collection of sessions. So we will have several sessions for each user. And when we are going to execute the logout, we are basically destroying the session. So for instance, we decide to destroy the current session for the user, or here, for instance, we can also put the user ID if we consider. Obviously, remember that it is something that probably I said to some of you previously when we talked together. And this is true for every API in which you need to check the user authenticated. Remember that the important value when you create the session, you serialize and deserialize the data inside the session, and usually inside the session you put the information about the user. It is extremely important that you use the user ID stored inside the session and not, for instance, inside the payload of an API, because the session is written and read by the server, so you are reasonably sure that no one altered the session, while the body of the request is arbitrary. The client decides what you send you. So, for instance, you can be logged in as user 1, and then in the request body put that you want to execute something as user 4, and this should not be allowed. So you always have to check to use the user ID stored in the session. So I go up a bit longer, but I hope that I clarify the reason why we choose to follow this approach. That is something that I suggest you to do to be more compliant to what we discussed during the course. But, you know, any other comments, any other proposal, any other... You remember why we have 3 APIs, even if your colleague only said login and logout? Why we need a 3rd API? From your point of view, at least. No ideas at all? Okay, you say we need a 3rd one to refresh the page. What do you mean?
Because if we log in one time, we would want to treat the credentials once we already log in. If we refresh the page, the login state should be maintained.
Okay, so I try to summarize what you said. The 3rd API is used to check if we were already logged in or not. Yeah, that's the point, because we don't want to display to the user a page in which we say, okay, you need to log it in, even if the user was already logged in. So we use this API to check, is the user logged in? If so, it's okay. If not, please, you need authentication. Obviously, if the entry needs authentication. Then, any other idea? I mean, I think that we have discussed everything about login, logout, and stuff like that. Do you have any other doubts, idea? Okay, so which API do we want to add? Okay, you talk a lot. Someone said courses, something like that. Get all courses, okay. How do you write the API? Okay, API / courses / all, do you propose? Okay, which one is better from your point of view? With or without all? Everybody agree with without? Okay, I would agree too. Just to be a bit faster, I would just take an example of a kind of API like this. So we will need, I would say, no request body. Do you agree? Can you repeat loudly? I only understood the last part, sorry. Okay. Okay. Obviously, if you want, you can specify it, but in this case, I would say, if you remember in the text, there is written that every user, even if not logged in, can retrieve the list of exams. So we don't need any particular. And this could be an example of response body, in which for every cursor, obviously, we should check if we are compliant with the database that we wrote before. But more or less it seems so. So we have ID, name, credits, pre-requirement, incompatibility. So the ID in this case is code. ID, name, credits, the max students, the incompatibility preparatory course is pre-requirements. I mean, as you remember, you can also have an API body different from the way in which you store the data on the database. The important thing is that when you collect the data, you convert the data to the proper layout of the database table. So it's not strictly necessary that your API has the same structure of the database as you probably already seen during the labs if you had a look to the lab solution. So this is just an idea for the API. Everybody agree with that? Do you have different ideas? Okay, I assume that it's okay for everyone. Then other APIs. Probably I already spoiled that, but do you need it for this API? Do we need authentication? Why no? Okay, that is something that I said before, but basically in the requirements there is written this API is accessible to anyone. Okay. Other APIs. Do you have a comment? Yeah. I wrote post. Ah, okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, obviously it is a get. Yeah, obviously. Thank you. Okay, next one. The study plan. Yeah, could have sense. So, and which kind of API do you imagine to have? Like this? And that's it? Or do you imagine to have more? What? Based on the student, so something like this, I guess. Right? Okay, I would agree. Do you have any other ideas? Yeah?
Maybe put the ID before study something in the past to APIs like
Okay, so do you imagine something like having ID / study plan, something like that? Okay, which one do you prefer? First one I heard.
What about the API/students/ID/student?
Yeah, I definitely prefer something like that if you want to use the ID to follow the REST approach, even if in this course we are not following it strictly, but you have a collection of students, and among the students you have the ID of the students. And for instance, I don't know, this API could be used to collect the student information, which is something that, if I correctly remember, we do not have in the exam requirements. But if we imagine a more complete application, could have sense that you, for instance, using this API, you retrieve the anagrammatic of the students, and with this value you retrieve the study plan. Makes sense. Again, do you prefer this one, which is definitely better than the second one, or the first one? This one. Do you agree on this one? Okay. Probably I would use the first one because it's shorter. I mean, in the end, I want the study plan number ID of the user, but even this is reasonable, so I would keep it. And what do you imagine to put in the request body? What? The ID of the students? Yeah, could have sense. Any other idea? Okay, for sure, we will need to authenticate this entry. Yeah, so we will. Honestly, I don't remember which syntax we are going to use for specify so, but for sure, authentication is needed. So you will need to forward the cookie with the session information. Yeah. Other ideas? Okay, I would say that probably from my personal perspective, considering that I already have the ID here, I would not put the ID also in the body. We don't need it, we already have it there, but it's not wrong if you want to put it. So just to be shorter, I would say no request parameters, but authentication needed. And which kind of response body do you imagine to have? Let's start copying something that could be useful, but which kind of response body do you imagine?
List of courses created, just the ones inside the study plan.
Okay, so basically the courses contained in the study plan could have sense, so we put something like ID, user ID, course ID, so it could have sense to have something like, I don't know, just an array and in this array you have something like let's keep the previous ID, then we have, I don't know, something like user ID equal 1, the course ID is this one, and here we have something like, I don't know, the study plan. I was thinking that managing the study plan in this way, this ID is completely useless. Why we don't need this ID from your point of view? Okay, because we basically have a primary key using the user ID and the course ID together. So every entry is uniquely defined by the user and the course, so that ID is basically not needed. You see, when you start developing, you notice even the mistakes that you previously did, and you can understand what you could do better. So I would imagine to have something like this. And that's it. Okay, there are also, do you imagine other possible responses? Okay. An empty list. Yeah, could have sense. So just to be faster, I would say something like this, and we can write something like, I don't know, empty list if no already available study plan. And obviously for this response, which code do you imagine to have? For the first one, when you have the study list, 200, I would say, okay, because we are saying everything is okay. Here your study plan. And for the empty list, which code do you imagine to have? Yeah, could have sense. Do you have other ideas? What? Yeah, probably I would say, I mean, let's before imagine what is another possible situation which could be here. You try to retrieve a study plan for user 7 and Yeah, unauthorized, obviously. This is another case, code 401 if not logged in. But we can also imagine, for instance, that we are trying to retrieve a study plan of a user that does not exist. In this kind of application, we do not have admin rights, but let's imagine that we have an admin that can retrieve all the possible study plans, but try to retrieve something that does not exist, not found. We can have an error code like that if we are trying to fetch a study plan that does not exist for a user that does not exist. So we have 404 not found. So in this case, I would say that we would put 200, or another possible situation that I would imagine is instead of retrieving an empty array, we can also give back a 204, which is it's okay but not content, if I correctly remember. I was going by mind, so probably I did a mistake and don't know, but for instance, even something like that, I would say that could be acceptable. So in case there is no study plan, we can go back 204, no content. Obviously, I suggest you to write the README a bit more. I mean, I'm just sketching some stuff to be faster, but when you will write your README, try to be more coherent, more consistent. Okay, we had many stuff to do more. Okay, other APIs. So we have the API to retrieve the courses, the API to retrieve the study plan, and then delete the study plan. Why do we need to delete the study plan? Do you remember? For instance, we needed to switch from full-time to part-time, because when we want to switch the study plan, we have to delete the whole study plan. So I would, where is it? I would just take something prepared to save a bit of time. So something like this could have sense. So delete API. Obviously, this API is completely different from what we discussed so far. So in our case, we should write something like to be, oh no. We should write something like API students ID study plans. Obviously, as we said before, we need authentication because we don't want to allow to anyone to delete the study plan. And I would say that the response body could be empty. So as it is proposed here, 204 success, no content. 401 if you are not authenticated. Obviously, we did not consider even before the internal server error, for instance. So something like for the 500 class. So for instance, the database is not responding, there is an issue like that, the database was deleted or stuff like that that we still have to consider. In this example, we have 503, honestly, I don't remember which code is this. HTTP code. A service unavailable. Yes, could have sense to have service unavailable, something like that. There are all possible values. Okay, more? What other kind of APIs does we need? I didn't hear it, sorry. Update the study plan, yeah. And in which way do you imagine to do so? With API do you want to use? Get, post, delete, put? Okay, put could have sense if you already have a study plan. To create, for instance, a new study plan from scratch, what do you propose? Post, that makes sense. So again, I imagine something like this one. I think that we can also delete this entry. So something like, again, we can keep the same syntax used before. So students, the ID, the study plan. We for sure need to authenticate the entry, do you agree? Or not? Do we need authentication for this operation? Why? Exactly. If you're not logged in, you cannot create a study plan. Makes sense. So which kind of stuff do you imagine of having inside the body? What? Okay, could have sense. So for instance, with kind of, no, those are dots. I was thinking that we're this stuff. Okay. So do you imagine something like an array, an object? What do you imagine? Panic.
Should we consider create the study plan and then have another API to add courses to the study plan, or do we create the study plan with the courses already here?
Okay, so the question is basically related to, do we have to create a study plan and then update it with the courses, or do we have to do in one shot? Is it right?
Yeah.
And what do you think about? Do you have any idea? What do you probably prefer to do, or whatever?
Well, if it was me, I will have an API with post where I will specify the option if it is full-time or part-time, and then I will have another API post API study-plan/add where I will put my courses, my list of courses.
Okay, so your colleague proposed I create a study plan before, so I specify part-time or full-time, and then I add the courses. Any one of you would do differently?
Since there are the table of study plans, already having the course, check the information about the course, I think that I will choose an option like that in which I make up, I don't know, an array of courses, then create the study plan, and another API to add other courses to the study plan.
Okay, so I try to summarize a bit. So you would go with like an array of courses, and then another API to update this stuff of courses. And when or where do you decide if the study plan is full-time or part-time? You already answered.
But even with this solution, we could add pass it to the body when we say if it is full-time or part-time.
Okay, so yeah, your colleague is right. So you cannot simply throw an array because you do not have any information about if it is part-time or full-time, and you cannot check if everything is okay. But you can. Both solutions, I would say, that are perfectly fine. I do not see any particular issue. None of them. Probably from a idempotent point of view, so having, if you follow your approach, every time that you call this post, you are 100% sure that you have this behavior because you're basically replacing the study plan anytime with no particular issue. With your solution, if the server was not well designed, for instance, you can continually add the same curse, you know, because every time you say, okay, add this curse, and the server, okay, add this curse, okay, added. So you need to have this additional check on the server side. But for instance, in your case, you can save memory. I mean, you can save data on during transmission, because if you just want to add one curse, easily you just say, okay, I would like to add this curse. Don't need to, if you for instance have 300,000 curses and you just want to add one, in that case it's much better your solution.
Actually, about my solution may not work without database implementation, because the study plan is a course ID and user ID, so we cannot just create a study plan without previously give it at least one course, because it would not be added to the database. So
yeah, in that case you are just to summarize the first colleague say, with my first approach we have some issue with the database. This is not necessarily true. You just not insert rows in a study plan, but you change the study plan type in the user table. So when you say, okay, I want to have this kind of study plan, you change the user table, and when you start to insert the courses, you modify the study plan table. So no big deal. You just have to be. I think also this opportunity about the stuff that we are discussing so far to stress something that we discussed with some of your colleagues before about the client side and the server side validation, which is very important. Remember that even because some of your colleagues ask me what I have to do for the exam or stuff like that, remember that in the most important part for validation is the server side, because we would like to protect the server integrity. So every time that you send something to the server, you have to be basically 100% sure that the server was not corrupted, so that there is no malicious intent to corrupt the server, or even something that is simply undesired. So a user do something wrong and you save something which is intrinsically wrong in the server side. It is something that you have to be sure. So it is extremely important that you check what you have in input in the server side. Obviously, it has also its own importance to validate the client side, because let's imagine that we have this kind of interface in which the user add different exams, and for instance you put two exams that are incompatible. The user works a lot on deciding his study plan. For instance, let's think about you when you enrolled in the master degree and you read all the possible courses and you say, okay, I want to take this one, I don't want to take this one, may I remove this course and stuff like that. And after working on your study plan, for instance, 2 hours, 3 hours, you try to submit it and the server simply reply you, I don't know, 400 wrong requests, and you lose everything. It's a bit frustrating, it's a bit annoying. So it is important to have validation in client like a service for the user. So you are helping the user in doing the task properly. But so I would say client-side validation are a service for the user. So at least from a security and integrity point of view, is slightly less important, because the client is related only to a user. Server-side validation is extremely important, because it's the part all the users connected to your application interact with the server. So it's extremely important that you validate the input in the server. Okay, considering that we are almost late, I mean we are 10, we are almost later than 10. I would say that we could have, if you want, 10 minutes break. You can have a coffee, something like that, and we can resume. Or do you prefer to go straight? What do you want to do? 10 minutes break? Okay, 10 minutes break, so.